Hello, everyone. Do I have to speak in the mic because it's whether I like it or not? Okay, I don't usually like a mic. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the College of Law, if you're not part of the College of Law family normally. I'm Jim Friedberg, and I teach international law here and run the immigration clinic and also teach some comparative courses. It's my pleasure today to introduce Fernando Patrón, who is here for a month as a distinguished visiting McDougall professor teaching a course in Mexican law and constitutional structure. And we are here today as the third in a series of McDougall International Law Lectures. This one being, as you see, on problems with democratic consolidation in Latin America, the Mexican case. Generally, as a principle, I distrust charm, perhaps because I'm not that highly blessed in a large quantity of it. But my usual instincts have been countered by my friendship with Fernando Patrón. I met him about a year and a half ago in February 2008 when I was down in Guanajuato at the law school there searching for lecturers for our WVU Law Summer Program in Mexico, which, by the way, we are having again this May. And for the law students among you, there will be an organizing meeting and fiesta tomorrow to tell you about this coming May's summer program in Mexico, at which I hope Fernando will again be a lecturer. Back to charm. Notwithstanding the fact that everybody loves Fernando and he is exceedingly charming, he is also substantively the real deal. He has a PhD from the University of Essex in England in political science, and he has a master's degree in public administration from University in Mexico City, as well as his undergraduate degree. In Mexico, the political science department, which they call the public administration department, is actually most closely aligned with the law department as well. Fernando's office is in the beautiful old law school in Guanajuato, and that's why he was a lecturer for us last time, and I hope he will be again. His areas of expertise include democratization in Latin America, the political transitions that have been occurring in many countries across the world, specifically applying the federalist structure and other aspects of the constitutional structure of Mexico to the problem of transitioning to a full democracy, a process which Mexico has been going through for at least a couple decades, along with most of the rest of Latin America, a good part of Africa, and a good part of Eastern Europe. So we're really happy to have him here to share his comparative knowledge with us and to entertain us and charm us, as well as educate. Fernando?
Well, is this on? Yeah? All right, then. Thank you very much for the presentation, for the introduction. I feel honored, actually, to be here with you today. And as a visiting professor, it has been quite an experience so far. I think a great experience for me, actually. And everyone, well, has been so kind to me that, well, sometimes I really don't know if this is for real or you are actually just joking with me. But, well, as it happens, I will really want to take this very serious and, well, start talking about my presentation today. I have to say a few things before I start. Well, first of all, I name this presentation problems with democratic consolidation. And we'll try to explain all of this throughout the presentation, of course, because I think that there are still major problems that need to be addressed in the region, in the Latin American region, especially where I come from, Mexico, of course. I think, well, it's, as I said just now, very important issues that must be addressed not only in a scholarly way, but also in social and political ways throughout, well, the countries in Latin America. I will try to explain, first of all, some concepts of democratic consolidation. What do we understand with democratic consolidation, and why there are, well, differences, of course, in the meanings of democratic consolidation. As it happens, well, as a political scholar, if you might say so, one has to take one, at least, even if it's a very broad meaning, but in order to organize and systematize information and knowledge, we have to do that. And, well, of course, I'm going to give you my version of democratic consolidation, how, of course, to study it, some approaches, of course, which is actually based in some other relevant political scholars and law scholars, mainly from Latin America. I was saying that this is a very important subject because over the last 2 decades in Latin America, well, the region actually has undergone through major changes regarding the building of democratic regimes. That's a fact. Most of these changes have focused in creating a solid electoral system, mainly. Of course, well, the main accomplishment has been to secure fair and competitive elections as the only mechanism to access political power. In fact, today, we can say, never undisputedly, of course, but I think that we can say that elections are really considered to be an effective mechanism in Latin America. In most countries, that's the rule, to access power, although many electoral processes are still controversial in some countries, like in Mexico, for instance, in 2006. The outcomes of that presidential elections were very disputed by the opposition political parties and, well, of course, by, well, the candidate that actually lost the elections, which, of course, took us to a post-electoral crisis. That we, of course, well, I think that we overcame that part now, and, well, there are still some instability in that area in the country. But what we can say, again, for sure, is that in the political arena, at least, most Latin American countries feature relative effective division of powers between branches, political competition among parties, and fair and transparent elections. There have been other attempts in some other key areas, of course, to accomplish democratic sustainability. For instance, reforms to build a transparent and accountable system to hold state officials accountable, of course, have also been made. Reforms to open up the economy, for instance, and transit from a state-oriented economy to a market-oriented economy. This in order to boost economic growth and opportunities. Likewise, changes toward guaranteeing civil and political rights. in order to include vast majorities of the country's populations into the democratic stream. Nevertheless, and that's the problem, I think, what we can appreciate from all these reform processes in the region so far, considering aside the political reforms, of course, which has been rather successful, I think, is that the outcomes in these regime changes have been uneven across the country and rather poor. Well, in some countries at least. We can say that these countries have failed until today to build regimes that at least can secure minimum standards of social and economic welfare, which are also central topics to democratic development. They have also failed to protect citizens' rights, to hold accountable governmental officials, to provide security to the citizenry, and, well, of course, to lower criminal rates, and, well, of course, to confront social disparities and income inequality. Ultimately, these failures, unfortunately, may erode support for democracy. That, I think, has been one of the major problems, and after this introductory speech, I guess that now we can, well, see, or at least comprehend, why the title of this afternoon's lecture. Changes, unfortunately, in these areas haven't brought about improvements in living conditions. And as citizens may perceive government incapacity, they might follow other alternatives to democratic governance. That is also a danger, I guess, that we face in the region as well. They might follow, for instance, populist leaders that can mobilize broad support and legitimacy despite poor performance. But the point is that they can manipulate vast segments of society through large social subsidies, for instance. And this is actually, as I said, something the Latin American countries have been subject to, mainly because the normal social disparities and income inequalities that we have in the region. Are all of the Latin American countries, we could say, saved from all these democratic breakdowns? My answer, well, from my point of view, will be no, not really. We have secure stability, regime stability, yes, but in some aspects only. We have some examples, for instance, the case of Venezuela, the case of Bolivia, the case of Ecuador, the case of Nicaragua, that have actually gone through these processes, although they elected their presidents in, well, relatively fair and competitive elections. As soon as they are in power, unfortunately, they try and they manage to actually secure other kind of policies different and opposed to democratic policies. And that is a problem. So, to begin with, all these problems are actually preventing Latin American regimes to become consolidated democracies. One caution note. I think that the countries in the region, we cannot actually treat them as very similar cases. As I am going to explain, again, democratic consolidation, I think, is context-dependent. Although, well, there has been some policies and some institutional changes that have worked through, most of the countries in general. The successes and failures of democratic consolidation, I think, depends absolutely in the context of each country. Nevertheless, well, it has been treated, the region as a whole, of course, but I think that it was important actually to underline this point. And that is one of the reasons that I am going to focus mainly in the Mexican case. And well, another reason is because I come from that country. And of course, well, I think that my expertise are regarding that case. Okay, then, let me explain you something about the aspects of democratic consolidation. Something that, well, there is a consensus among political scholars that one of the main aspects is, well, are these variables, at least. Creating effective democratic governance absolutely has proven to be, well, to be a tremendously difficult task. Indeed. Why? Why is that? Well, first of all, successful democratic governance entails maintaining reasonably high quality of democratic practice. That's something very difficult actually to attain. Well, and most of the cases it's more difficult for countries that have strong authoritarian heritage. It also entails promoting economic growth, providing citizen security, and of course addressing the serious social problems such as poverty, income inequality, poor social services, and procuring the enforcement of civil rights. Most countries in Latin America have implemented policies. They have made laws to address these problems. And they have made also some important improvements regarding these matters, of course. But unfortunately, they have also failed to effectively sustain these institutional arrangements so far. And of course, they have failed to implement these policies, in order to be more successful and to create better conditions in each country. The outcomes vary. Yes, absolutely. They do. There is a question. What have worked for ones can work for the others? Not necessarily. And that's a problem. If we could have like this magic answer to all the problems, and if we could implement the same policies throughout all the countries and across regions, of course, well, I think that most of the of the people actually that try to do comparative politics will be out of business. That's a problem, yes. Yeah. Although, as I said, some policies, practices, and institutions are more likely, of course, to foster success than others, that's for sure. We must not entirely put aside some important institutional arrangements that have worked very good to build democracy in other countries, we have to recognize that success in consolidation depends on every country history and contextual references, of course. Let me put you an example that has been commented a lot and, of course, discussed and debated throughout the region. And mainly, well, political scholars and law scholars have debated all these policy principles that we call the Washington Consensus, for instance. And, well, the debate has been mainly trying to answer, well, do they really work, or are we losing our time trying to consolidate and, of course, to enforce policies that are actually that will never work, actually, in our countries? Why has this debate taken place? Well, because the results have varied deeply, again, from country to country. There is not a magic formula. One of the problems was that Latin American countries were bound by the Washington Consensus in order to obtain financial support. Successful consolidations depends mainly on historical roots that democratic transitions and consolidation processes actually are trying to break through. For instance, Mexico is actually a country that is still deeply rooted, I think, in authoritarian rule, and it kind of coexists with democratic rule, which makes things even harder, actually, for the analysis, first of all, and secondly, of course, for democratic consolidation. Because, as I will conclude, well, today with my presentation, one of the things that are necessary for democratic consolidation is that cohabitation, if I may say so, between democratic institutions and non-democratic institutions are actually one of the major perils for a country in order to consolidate. And that, well, of course, it's a major problem. Effective states are important for successful of democratic consolidation. Indeed, states continue to be key actors in every step of the regime change. We can say that, absolutely. Well, promoting, of course, civil rights, defending civil rights, also promoting political rights, and trying to build, of course, well, some sort of better social organizations and, of course, access to social rights for all the people. Institutionalized party system facilitates effective democratic consolidations. Absolutely. I mean, that has been one of the core variables taken into and factored into the democratic consolidation analysis. Because, well, they boost, of course, political participation, and as long as the party systems are strong, are plural, of course, and are competitive, we can say that at some point they will be used and will serve as preventions of, or to prevent, of course, a concentration of power in one branch or in one political party. Formal political institutions as a key for consolidation. Indeed, it is a necessary condition, I would say, but not a sufficient one. Elections are extremely important, are like the first stepping stone in order to consolidate democracy, absolutely. But it doesn't end in elections. It has to go further. democracy has to expand to other arenas of the country, such as, well, social interactions, for instance, and there are other important variables that will actually permit that a democratic regime is a full democratic regime. One of the most important, from my point of view, is actually this last one. Historical legal legacies shape the prospect of consolidation. Yes, I think it does. But we must not consider this some sort of impassable burden or barrier that eventually countries, that countries will never overcome. No, they will, absolutely, and they can. I think that cases such as Chile, Argentina, have proven that, actually. They have banned, they have erased from history their authoritarian legacies. And that's important. There is also a problem that we have in Mexico. We haven't done that yet. Because, well, from my point of view, authoritarian legacies or authoritarian practices, yes, are still present. They are not, all of them at least, are not in the past yet. And that is also a problem. What is the main point to consider democratic consolidation in every country? We can say this, I think, well, probably, in more simple words. Consolidating democracy means basically that democracy is the only game in town. And that's it. That institutions are democratic, of course. That governments are transparent, are open, of course, and they play by this set of rules, absolutely. And behaviors of every group, social and political groups, actually are bound by the rules of this game. And, of course, everyone recognizes that democracy is the only game in town. That's it. I mean, I hope that it could be as simple as I am, well, trying to say it. But unfortunately, one of the dangers, if I may say so, that we have had, mainly, well, not mainly, across the region, fortunately, is that the recognition that democracy is the only game to be played in town actually has not been made by, well, all the parties involved in this game, unfortunately. And that is a problem. Which are the problems? Let me try to explain you this through this graphic. And, well, I hope that this is not more confusing because I made this, but I don't understand it. No. Just let me, no. All right. Let's just imagine that democratization, well, around the world, considering all countries that, well, have authoritarian heritage, well, it's like a continuum from an authoritarian regime to an electoral democracy, which here, well, actually, you can see some main features of the meaning of, well, each of these stages in the continuum of evolution, but it can be a regression of regime democraticness as well. And then, well, of course, we can make a leap forward to a liberal democracy And then again, what some of the political scholars actually have called advanced democracy, not meaning this as, well, something like the last stage of democracy. I really don't think that there is actually a point where there is full consolidation and, well, there is nothing left to do. No. That wouldn't be the case. But if we can actually, well, present these stages as such, I think that we can see that regressions could be, of course, well, to this side, to the left, and leaps forward in order, well, to include more political and civil freedoms. Of course, what has to do about the rule of law and accountability will be the liberal democracy. And an advanced democracy, actually, according to most scholars, will feature also the inclusion of more social and economic liberties in every country. It is my point of view that the average of Latin American countries are still here at this point, between what we can call an electoral democracy, that, as I told you before, yes, we have relatively inclusive, fair and competitive elections, but most of the times we fail to uphold political and civic and civil freedoms. And that, again, is a problem because, well, according to this chart, actually, what could happen if we only hold relatively fair and competitive elections is that, well, actually, the system, the electoral democracy could always go backwards and, of course, present a democratic breakdown. Where, well, I think that everyone here actually know what an authoritarian regime means. So, well, there is no need for me, I think, to explain that. Although, well, for most Americans, you haven't experienced the red part, this part. I hope I'm right. I really hope so. So, yeah, I mean, what we mean with democratic consolidation, actually, is to go to the right. That's it. And try to secure at least, well, these areas of all the democratic features and, of course, well, provide it to society in an efficient way. Again, I think that the debate, we could actually place it right here. Where are we going? Are we going to make a leap backwards or forward? And that is the problem. There are some other scholars and political commentators that actually, well, they have said that although we have experienced in Latin American countries some dramatic periods of civil unrest, for instance, post-electoral crisis, for instance, there is a major point here and a major fact. In most of the cases, we haven't had, at least in the last 2 decades, a democratic breakdown. But, well, Peru, of course, in the 1990s, Haiti, unfortunately, and, well, Honduras today, unfortunately. Yes. That's the danger. And the well, of course, the most difficult thing to do actually is to go to the right in this chart. That is a problem. Let me give you some of the characterizations or some features of Mexico since what we call transition to democracy. Transition to democracy, although we cannot actually put it in, well, a real exact period or a real exact date, well, because actually these processes are not like that. We can say that in Mexico in the 1990, actually started this transition to democracy process. Mainly, again, through political reforms. It is a fact that, well, of course, this could be a little bit controversial as well, but overall, we can say that since 1997, democratic rule in elections. We have had division of power. We had major shifts in the balance of power. Before the democratic rule in Mexico, actually, what we had was a hegemonic party system, for instance, what we call presidencialismo, which is actually, well, that the president controls everything. The president is above legislative and judicial branches, and of course, apart from his constitutional faculties, his legal faculties, he has other political faculties, such as the control of the main party, for instance, and, of course, the control of Congress, so he is, well, used to be basically the main legislator. You know? We could say that since 1997, actually what happened there is that the hegemonic party lost, through elections, of course, its majority of representation in Congress. So the president did no longer actually, well, have this majority of representation from his party and could no longer control Congress. So gradually, actually, the balance of power started to shift again. Likewise, of course, the party system started to be more competitive, mainly from a very gradual and a long process of political reforms that we have had in the country since the 1970s, actually, that gave way that, well, more political parties, opposition parties, actually could participate in elections, and they started to win representation and seats mainly in Congress, in the Federal Congress. And, of course, one of the major events that we have had in Mexico in the last decade has been the alternation of party in the executive branch in 2000. The Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which is, well, if I can translate it just like Institutional Revolutionary Party, actually, dominated the party system for more than 70 years in Mexico. And also, well, of course, held vast majorities of representation throughout the 20th century in Mexico. So it was until 2000 when a different party, different from the PRI, actually took power in Mexico. So, as you can see, and, well, this is consistent with my previous presentation, of course, or what I have been saying so far, Mexico also, I think, that qualifies as an electoral democracy because, well, all these changes in the last 2 decades at least have enabled the political system, well, to democratize first, and of course elections are actually now, well, at least the only way to gain power in the country. Before that, what we had in the country was, unfortunately, a system where the incumbent president selected and appointed his successor. That is not the case anymore. The problem, to my way of thinking, is that we concentrated all the effort so far in order to build a fair, a solid electoral system, which hasn't ended. Major critiques are still, major critiques about the electoral system, of course, and political performance of parties and the government. We do still have that. I mean, it's not concluded yet, but the outcomes represent at least this transition to democracy. As I was saying, I think that we dedicated most of the efforts in order to create this system that other areas of what democracy, of the democratic consolidation, were, if not neglected, at least partially abandoned. And that's a problem. For instance, policies in order to level the conditions, the social conditions, which is very important because actually from this social context, it depends that most of the populations can actually have access to rights. One of the major, I think, problems that we have in the country, of course, is poverty. If we are talking about that 53% of the total population lives in extreme poverty conditions, what it also means is that 53% of the population do not have access, unfortunately, to social rights, do not have access, or they do not know that they have civil and political rights as well. And, well, with these social disparities and economic inequality, we can say that although we do have fair and competitive elections as a mechanism to access power, the rest of the areas, unfortunately, hasn't actually undergone through deeply reformed processes. The rule of law, that's another major problem that we do have. The criminal justice system is completely ineffective. Just to give you some, basic data over there, when I say only 3 out of 10 crimes are reported to the authorities, this is not because people that are actually victims of, any crime do not want to go and report the crime. This is just because, and simply, they don't trust authorities. Most of the people think, actually, that, there is no use, actually, in doing that because, judiciary or judicial authorities are not going to do anything about it. And that's the thing. And, of course, only one of those reported is brought to trial. So it is completely ineffective. And, we have undergone, in the last years through what we could say a comprehensive reform in the justice system in Mexico as well, in order, to make it more transparent and more efficient. And, of course, it tries to deal with things that has to do mainly with the administration of justice in Mexico. But some of the features of the law enforcement, as I put it there, is erratic, is because, well, you must you must consider, for instance, police officers are underpaid, they are underprepared, they are not very professional. Also, this system actually is still highly centralized in the federation, and, well, where crimes are committed, either in states or in municipalities, most of the times, unfortunately, well, the authorities in those levels of government feel that they don't have the capacity to combat crime. And that's, well, again, one of the major problems that we have had. Of course, when a system is not accountable, is not transparent, this, unfortunately, enables widespread corruption and impunity. And it also gives not a wrong idea, but gives a perception to society that all the system is corrupted. When that happens, actually, citizens do not feel safe, with authorities, of course, with the government, of course, and do not feel protected in the country. So basically, as you can see, I mean, in these three main points, these are the two areas, at least, that we need actually to make fast and consistent improvements in order to secure democratic consolidation. There are other major aspects that I will also like to address very, very fast during this presentation that have to do on what the people actually, what do societies think about their governments. Social perception is important. Although, well, of course, we need to factor in some other variables and some other contextual traits of each country, well, in order to present absolutely, well, a more accurate panorama of what's going on in Latin American country, and especially in Mexico. I'd like to present you some of the results. I heavily rely in this part of the presentation in Latino Barometro, that I really hope that some of you, most of you, have heard about it. No, all right. So, well, no problem, no problem. What's Latino Barometro? Actually, it's an annual study of public opinion in most of the countries in Latin America, and it tries to measure and, of course, provide as well information about, well, attitudes mainly toward democracy. What do people think about their regimes? How do they feel, of course, about not only governmental performance, but the provision, for instance, of social rights? Who benefits from democracy in their countries? I will highlight some points, so I think that after this, maybe we can actually discuss some of these elements. And I will also focus at some parts of this second part of my presentation in Mexico. Some of the perceptions, well, actually, what can the people tell of democracy, or how the survey, yes, this poll puts it, is that first of all, yes, citizens must feel that their social needs are fulfilled, that they, of course, can ensure at least a dignifying way of living, for instance. What does democracy mean? And mainly, is it more related to liberties, or it is, well, does it only has to do with elections? And, of course, well, social and economic opportunities, for instance. Another important question, I think, is that is there another alternative, another option apart from democracy that societies in Latin American countries would support, for instance? And, well, of course, this has also to do with the perception of who benefits mainly from democracy so far in each country. Just to give you some features of society and the political class in Mexico, actually they share some of these features. Well, we can say that despite all the improvement that we have made in the political area, for instance, there are still some society's values that are characterized mainly and are more on the side of the authoritarian legacies rather than, well, of course, being democratic attitudes or values, unfortunately. And this also, I think, qualifies to characterize the political elites. I remember that one of the, well, most prestigious political scholars once characterized, actually, Latin American countries and their political classes, or elites as a whole, as groups that will invariably try to monopolize power, to manipulate, of course, democratic rule in order to secure them in power, fortunately, and from that point on, well, to limit, of course, liberties so other groups can take power and can finally overthrow them. I think that this is, or this comes rather familiar to some cases, such as the Chavista project in Venezuela that has happened over there, the Morales project as well in Bolivia, and, well, in some point, although he was overthrown from power, the case of Honduras with, we cannot say yet former President Manuel Zelaya. No, not yet, yes. But let me just present you this data. Well, the main meanings of democracy. Latino Barometro actually, well, provides us with this information. How can we interpret actually this table? Well, these are percentages, some of the Latin American countries, and the people were asked about the identification with democracy. What of these actually words or meanings actually are more important, and how can you relate democracy with these three meanings? So, as you can see, and, well, strikingly surprising, Venezuela, actually, the Venezuelans, actually, what in 2008, they actually relate democracy more with liberties rather than elections or holding elections, and also with an economic system that ensures a dignified income. Most, well, other cases, I mean, Panama, Costa Rica, Uruguay, and Argentina, and well, as well of the Dominican Republic actually, their citizens actually think that it has to do more with liberties rather than the other two options. In the Mexican case, that unfortunately I have these things and I don't know what to do here, but what do I do? All right then. Okay then. So here, we do have Mexico. And in Mexico, actually, people relate or democracy means elections rather than liberties or an economic system that ensures a dignified income. In the case of Mexico, I can comment that this is not really surprising, this outcome. Why? Because if elections so far is, well, one of the main areas where we have accomplished democratic transition and consolidation, well, it is kind of obvious that most of the people is going to relate elections with democracy rather than other areas, well, such as civil and political liberties, for instance, or economic opportunities and social opportunities as well. When it comes to the support for other types of regimes, what happens here is that this is very interesting. At least I think that. People were asked, would you support a military government to replace the democratic government? Well, just in case the situation got very bad, or, of course, you will never support a military government under any circumstances. Here, the response, well, actually that, well, the graphic corresponds to the answer that I would never support a military government. And as you can see, most of the cases actually, well, they tell us that democracy is actually at least finding a way through society and trying to bind in completely with society. Here it means, for instance, this is the case of Mexico, that 63% of those interviewed answered that they will never support a military government or any other kind of government apart from democracy under any circumstances. The Costa Rican case, well, of course, that is one of the most consolidated democracies in the area. The Chilean case as well, of course, and, well, some other cases as Uruguay, where we can actually see there that these countries, well, they have, of course, built very solid electoral system, but they have been very successful in implementing policies to overcome poverty, for instance, implementing policies to transparent and make more effective their justice systems as well. And we can say that these are the countries that are actually, well, making most improvements towards consolidation to democracy in the region. Then again, I think that what this chart actually means, this graphic actually means, is that democracy is holding up in the region, and actually the chances, well, at least for the majority of the countries, well, in society's perception to democratic breakdown, are not very high. But as you can see, of course, the case of Honduras is here in the last places. This is America Latina average. And Paraguay, which, well, they come from a very recent authoritarian period, unfortunately. You can say, well, these countries, these three countries, actually less than half of those that were interviewed actually answered favorable to democracy. Let me put you also this. This is, I think, very interesting. Can democracy works without parties and congresses? It is struggling well, it is surprising at some point these percentages of society's perception. Why? Why is this? Well, mainly because across the region, what has been a constant is that political parties and legislative powers or legislative branches have always been extremely, well, or have always had extremely low acceptance . So, as you can see here, well, for instance, the case of Uruguay, 71% can perfectly work without political parties, and 73% said democracy can perfectly work without congresses or without deputies and senators in this case. The case of Mexico, well, a little bit more than half of those who were interviewed said that democracy could perfectly work without political parties and congresses. When we asked, actually, on the case of Mexico, in particular, how important are political parties for democracy, this is not very surprising as well, when you can see that the political elite's perception is that political parties are extremely important for democracy. Because they come from political parties. That's it. Yes. That's it. There is no other explanation to that. But when you ask, for instance, to society as a whole, oh well, just let me go through this very quickly because I think that I am running out of time. This is also very important. The perception of society about the rule of law in Mexico, mainly. As you can see there, well, what are laws good for? Well, of course, to protect the interests of the wealthy and powerful in the society, to protect the general interests, to promote justice, of course, and to enforce justice, to, well, for authority abuse as well, and, well, other options. Again, most of the people, because, what? Oh, no, to enable, sorry, yes. Yeah, it is bad, absolutely bad. Yes, that's right. Most of the people actually thinks that the rule of law only serves in Mexico for those who are powerful and wealthy and who have access to the justice system, who have money, actually, well, to hire a good lawyer, for instance. They will never set foot in jail. And that's a problem, you know. And, of course, the law only serves, of course, to enable abuse from authorities. You know. The other options, well, they don't do actually good. But what we can actually see from this chart is that, well, again, there is a characterization of Mexican society that we can say that feature low levels of trust and confidence in the majority of the political institutions and authorities, a weakened and a lax rule of law orientation, of course, and, well, understanding as well, and the generalized perception that the law is used for groups' interests. Is democracy preferable than any other form of government? When you contrast, or if we try to contrast in this period from 1997 to 2005, the perceptions between the citizenry as a whole, I'm using these two sources of information, Latino Barometer and other national surveys, attitudes, values, and opinions of parliamentarian elites in Mexico as well. So if we try to contrast these two opinions, we can see, well, that political elites, well, so far, they have been more favorable, of course, to democratic rule, probably not to what it entails, but to the process mainly that we have constructed in the country so far, at least. But the citizenry, they don't have that high opinions towards democracy as political elites do. I think, again, this is rather obvious, given that political elites, so far, well, they have actually gained much more since transition to democracy, at least political parties, and not so much the citizenry as a whole. This is an overall perception of who benefits from democracy in Latin America. Most of the countries, this is contrasting the years 2005 and 2006. Most of the countries, of course, when they were asked, is your country governed for the benefit of the wealthy and powerful? Well, I think that the outcomes are very clear. And this perception actually, again, well, it kind of provides us with a picture where institutional change hasn't been actually so powerful and deeply in other areas as, well, at least in elections it has been in most of the countries. We must consider also something when we try to read these numbers, this data. Most of the times it happens in Latin American countries that actually in countries where they have given major steps toward consolidation, where they have developed more all these features of democratic consolidation, where they have, for instance, well, constructed systems that actually promote and also enforce political and civil rights, where they have more effective justice systems as well, and where they have combated poverty more successfully, citizens' opinions are, we could say, more critical than in those countries where governmental performance has been rather poor, we could say that. And that's a fact in Latin America. Probably we could think, well, that's not very rational, because if a country is doing so good, society, absolutely, well, they will have, well, to come with an opinion that it is doing good. However, it is not the case, again, for Latin America. In some cases, well, actually, for instance, in countries like Venezuela, which have, surprisingly, in this kind of surveys, the highest qualifications for democracy, according to the citizenry, what we can also say, well, it is not, of course, because the system runs very democratic. No, not really. It's because some of the times this kind of populist leaderships actually not, well, manipulates, yes, but creates a kind of sense to society that the government is really working for them through major social and populist subsidies to, well, vast segments of the population, for instance. Whereas other countries that they have reformed the rule of law, well, the lawmaking systems as well, they do not rely on state subsidies, but they kind of maintain other orientations, such as market-oriented policies, but at the same time, they try to provide citizenry as a whole with basic social rights. Most of the times in this Latino Barometer surveys, again, they do not get the highest qualifications. That is a problem, yes. It's something that we need to reinterpret it in better ways, yes, absolutely. Let me just finish with this. Perception on what does democracy guarantees. As you can see, well, again, one of the major problems in Latin America when we actually separate both civil and political liberties and economic and social liberties, well, gets pretty clear. These are percentages across the region. When they were asked if democracy guarantees the civil rights, well, a majority of those interviewed actually, they think that, yes, democracy in my country, in our countries, actually guarantees these civil and political liberties. But when it comes to the part of the economic and social liberties, what we can say is that, unfortunately, well, according to society's perceptions, democracy, again, has failed to guarantee this kind of liberties, again. Mostly, well, this one has been, in recent years, actually one of the major concerns of Latin American citizenry, the protection against crime and violence, and democratic governance throughout the region. Well, in this regard, actually, well, it gets the worst qualifications. Let me just conclude my presentation. How to make democracy the only game in town? As I said when I started this presentation, if we could have like a magic formula, well, first of all, I wouldn't be talking here about these things. Absolutely not. Yes. If everything works, or if there's a set of policies and institutional arrangement that work actually for everyone, well, we would have accepted that as, well, a fact, and we wouldn't be debating on what we do have to do in order to accomplish democratic consolidation. But at least if we can just put some important arguments and some coordinates of this discussion that are central, are key features to consolidate our regime, well, I think at least, well, that's an improvement. First of all, as I said before, yes, democratic institutions cannot coexist with non-democratic institutions. In order to consolidate a regime, authoritarian legacies must be erased entirely from a country's practices, institutional arrangements, of course, behaviors and attitudes. That is, I think, a very strong argument and a rule, a principle. Democracy can become the only game in town when, of course, no significant political group seriously attempt to do or to seek an alternative apart from the democratic regime, such as what happened, unfortunately, in Honduras. Another paramount feature is the rule of law, for instance. Consolidation will come when governmental and non-governmental forces and all groups, I will say, are actually subject and habituated to resolve conflicts within the bounds of a specific set of rules, set of laws. Absolutely. If groups want actually to take the conflict and solve it and resolve it elsewhere, the democratic institutions or the procedures that were actually built by the democratic process, well, that's where, again, problems start to arise. And another very important thing is when a strong majority of society and public opinion we have to be convinced. But this is not only a call for, well, some sort of willingness to be convinced. No, absolutely. I mean, we have to be convinced because we have to see, actually, that the system works. If we do not see this, we are never, of course, going to be convinced. But democratic procedures and institutions are the most appropriate way to govern collective life. When there's this conviction and this attitude towards democracy, not only in Mexico, but across Latin American countries, I think that, well, all the worries, all the dangers of democratic breakdown, well, of course, regarding this point, I think that will be overcome, well, at last. Let me just conclude. Sometimes we have felt in the Latin American region, mainly in Mexico, and for Mexican scholars, that we have lost the path to consolidation. This is a process that Mexico embarked at a decade ago. As I said, it is very difficult to give policy solutions that will guarantee success on consolidation. But as long as the democratic rule still holds as the dominant way for regime organization, at least I think, in my country, that we can cultivate expectations that democracy will be, at some point, the only game in town. Thanks a lot.